Ma'am, good afternoon, ma'am. I'm audible. Dr. Anita, ma'am. Audio no connect aglang sir. Video mattum da connect aayiru.
இல்ல அவங்க ஆடியோ கனெக்ட் ஆகலைன்னு சொல்லிட்டு இருக்காங்க. மேடம் ஆடியோ அன்மியூட் பண்ணுங்க மேடம். அனிதா மேடம் உங்க வீடியோல வந்திருக்கீங்க பாருங்க. ப்ளீஸ் அன்மியூட் யுவர் ஆடியோ.
Can you hear me, sir? Sir?
Yes, you are audible, ma'am. Yes, you are audible.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
And the countdown clock is going on, right?
Where do I find it?
No issues. No issues. You'll get a signal. Don't worry.
Yes, you can give me a warning. Thank you.
Ma'am, you can start. You're ready to go. You can start,
Okay.
ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone over here. I deem it a great pleasure to invite Madam Yashmin here. Welcome, Madam. She serves as the Director of E-Learning, as a lecturer in the Department of Behavioral Sciences at Rusunga University. She has earned a Bachelor of Liberal Arts degree with double majors in Psychology and Religious Philosophy from Spicer University, Pune, and a Master's Arts degree in Andrews University, USA, respectively. She received her PhD in Psychology in Creso University, Zambia. Currently, she is pursuing a second PhD in Educational Management, University of South Africa. And she says she loves reading and traveling a lot. Madam, over to you, madam.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Anita. Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon to each one of you present on this platform. Greetings from Zambia. So we basically get started. I'm told we don't have a lot of time, so we basically get started. I'm requesting the admin to allow me to share my screen. Could you kindly allow me to share my screen, please?
Yes, ma'am, please proceed. Yes, ma'am, please proceed.
Sure, thank you very much. Thank you. Just give me a second so that I get started. Right. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, ma'am, please proceed.
Thank you very much. So my topic for this afternoon's presentation is basically learning to learn. And I really want to take this opportunity to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share my ideas, share the research that has been going on in this field, and basically sensitize ourselves about what is really going on in this field and how we can utilize this in our day-to-day lives as well as our individual disciplines. So the overview of our presentation, it's going to be a really short and hopefully sweet presentation. The introduction, I will try and give you an introduction to the presentation or the topic itself. Then we will get into defining learning, the process of learning. We will get to understand, and then we will touch a bit on what exactly is the concept of learning to learn, or as it is popularly known as meta learning. And then we will get to see a few metacognitive strategies that are basically applied to learning and which can actually benefit ourselves as educators and our students too. And finally, we will conclude this presentation. Now, to introduce, I want to use the words of a famous, renowned psychologist, Professor Herbert Gurdjieff. He basically said that the new education must teach the individual how to classify and reclassify information, how to evaluate its veracity, how to change categories when necessary, how to move from the concrete to the abstract and back. So when you talk about all these aspects, you're basically talking about a new form of learning. You know, he profoundly mentions that tomorrow's illiterate will not be those who cannot read and write, like the definition is. You know, when you call a person illiterate, that basically means the person cannot read and write. But according to Professor Gurjo, he basically says, tomorrow's illiterate are not those people who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. This basically proves to us the importance of learning to learn. It's not adequate enough in this 21st century world for us to be able to, mold our thinking pattern to one conventional way of thinking or one conventional way of learning. We have to learn to rewire, unwire, and then rewire again for us to be able to substantially put across our ideas and thoughts in the world that we are living in today. Thus, we basically move on to our next slide. Now, in this slide, I want to bring out basically what we are conventionally acquainted with. When we are talking about education or learning, we specifically talk about three components of learning. You talk about knowledge, you talk about skill, you talk about attitude. These are the three cardinal aspects of developing a competence, which is in turn learning. But then very profoundly elaborated by Maya Balik, in one of her books that she writes about learning and learning to learn. She says, it's no longer adequate for us to focus on these three dimensions of learning, because there is one other dimension that we have been missing out, and that is learning to learn. So it's no longer adequate for us to say, okay, I am a learned person, or I am adequate in learning by saying, okay, I have the knowledge, I have the skill, and I have the attitude. So I have the competence. It's no longer adequate. She actually talks about for us to recognize the importance of learning to learn. Hence, I had chosen this topic for us to focus on, as to understand what is it. I mean, there's so much of discussion going on. There is so much of talk going on about this topic of learning to learn. So what is it? That's what I want to present to you this afternoon, and hopefully you will enjoy. So before we get into the concept of learning to learn, I want to bring to you this aspect of, let us understand what is learning. So what is learning? And this is where I have basically provided you with different definitions provided by different scholars. You have numerous, copious amounts of literature which actually tries to define learning. So I'm not going to go ahead and read each one of them for you, but I have basically put across for you to see that there are a lot of information. There are a lot of definitions provided by different scholars. To mention one of them, Malcolm Knowles. Malcolm Knowles is a renowned scholar in the field of adult learning. And he basically puts it as the process of gaining knowledge and expertise. But I want to share with you, and we want to spend a bit of time on one of my favorite definitions of learning. And I will tell you why it's my favorite. Now, this definition is basically provided by Richard Meyer. And he says learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior which occurs as a result of experience and or practice. Now, if we look at this definition, there are three major components that gives us a better understanding as to what learning is. First one, learning is a relatively permanent. Relatively permanent. So what does it mean? That it is something which is permanent or temporary in relation to certain factors. We will look at that later. But it's basically, we are saying, and obviously for us, we know it in our day-to-day lives experience, we know that everything that we learn doesn't stick with us. There are things that we remember. We may have been exposed to it only once, but it sticks with us for our entire life. But then there are things that we actually deliberately try to make it permanent, and it doesn't stick with us. So definitely there are certain factors based on which learning can be either temporary or permanent. The second, it brings about a change in behavior in the learner. So when you're talking about learning taking place, there needs to be a change in the behavior of the learner. Now, mind you, it's a change. It is not mentioned whether it is good change or a bad change. So this basically proves to us that learning doesn't have to always be good. We don't only learn good things, we also learn bad things. I'll give you an example. In my university days in Pune, I had a lot of Tamil friends, a lot of them. And when I asked them to teach me Tamil, they basically started off by teaching me the insults. And that is pretty much the experience of all of us. If you're learning a language from a peer, then you will obviously start with an insult, and then you graduate into trying to understand or master the language. And this is why, did I learn it? Oh, yes, I did. And then, of course, I got to understand the other words and basically understand the language. But it does bring about a change in behavior. So after undertaking a learning experience, if you as a learner have not changed, then learning hasn't taken place. And the third point, it occurs as a result of experience and practice. Now, we all know learning experiences are not just limited to the classroom environment. I think we learn more through our life's experiences than we learn in a formal classroom setup. Obviously, we become better at any learning of a task by practicing. So it occurs as a result of either experience or practice. So that's about learning. And I hope we have gotten a grasp of what learning, the behavior of learning, the concept of learning is. Let's move on. Now, these are the factors that I was talking about. Remember, we said that learning is relatively permanent. So these are the factors, some of the factors which actually ensures whether your learning experience will be a temporal one or whether it will be a permanent one. So to mention a few, you can go ahead and add so many others, but I have just to mention a few. Kind of material. You know, if your material is simple, learning will be faster. If your material is complex, learning will take longer. If you're talking about age of the learner, we all know that, okay, fine, there are kinds of material that are grasped easily by a younger learner, or there are kinds of material which are understood or which are assimilated by faster by an older learner. Now, gender of the person, there are substantial scientific proof that gender differences do appear in terms of learning concepts. So there are things that the females learn faster. There are things that males learn faster. So because pretty much the whole reason is being biologically, we use our brain differently. For example, when you're talking about learning a language, the females pick up language faster. Even we have seen this even in our children. Our girl children start speaking faster than our boy child. So when you're talking about gender, there are gender differences in terms of the concept of learning. Then when you talk about attitude of the learner, we all know if we have positive attitude, learning becomes easier, or learning is facilitated. If you have a negative attitude, obviously it is inhibited. Likewise, you're talking about the interest, the length of the series, the previous knowledge about the task, the expected result. There are substantial research that has been done, and it has been basically proven that if we know learning of a particular task can actually give us a positive result, we will, let's say, we will earn monetary benefits, or we will earn social benefits, or we will earn esteem benefits, then learning is facilitated. We are more remotivated. Our motivation is higher. So all these things basically facilitates the learning. Also, the way we present our task is very, very important, because when you talk about organization, we all know that as human beings, as learners, we learn from what we know to what we don't know. And that is why any kind of learning experience, if you are the tutor, or if you are the presenter, or if you are the educator, as you're presenting your material and you want your audience, you want your learners to learn it, then please make sure that there is a known to unknown kind of a organized pattern as you are disseminating your material. And as I mentioned, there are a lot of other factors which I will leave it for you to research on and find out. Now, let's talk about the process. Now, this is the most popular diagrammatic representation of learning, where you're talking about the unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence, then conscious competence to unconscious competence. Now, when you're talking about this, well, this is the most popular diagrammatic representation, but I have decided today that I'm going to share with you my favorite materials. So here is the learning process as presented by Henderson and Snugden. Now, I like the hierarchical depiction of the learning stages. This is why this is one of my favorite learning process representations. Now, when we talk about learning process, it basically starts with understanding the skill. Obviously, you're talking about the knowledge. You're acquiring the knowledge. You're getting to understand the task and things like that. So understanding the skill first, which then basically escalates to the higher level, which is acquiring and defining the skill. So you're acquiring and you are basically kind of smoothing up the rough edges. You're trying to trial and error and things like that. So you're smoothing up the rough edges. So that's where you're acquiring and refining, not only acquiring the skill, but refining the skill. Then from there, there's an escalation to the next step, which is automation of the skill. Now, automation is it's very biological process where the learning process basically, or the neural connections that we have made throughout this process of learning basically gets almost at the automation level. I'll give you an example. Our grandparents and grandmothers especially, and mothers who have spent most of their lives in their kitchen cooking and all those stuff and everything, for them cooking is like their second nature. They don't have to measure how many spoon, how many ml of oil, or how much of salt, or for them it's like automatic. They look at the amount of food and they know exactly the amount of salt that will be adequate for that particular food to taste better, or the amount of chili, or the amount of any other spices. I mean, come on, ask a grandmother to make rasam. She will make rasam blindfolded. But you and I don't think so. We have to keep measurements and things, so it hasn't been automized in our system yet because of we haven't gotten into refining. If you ask me to make rasam, yeah, I can, but I don't think I will reach to that level of expertise. Now, from there, you move on to the generalization. So you have acquired that automation of the skill in that particular task, okay, whatever the particular task is. And now you're taking that skill to a more general level. Anything similar to that particular task, you will apply the same skills and the same knowledge, and you will do it equally well. So if you know driving, it doesn't matter really whether you're driving an Audi or you're driving a BMW or driving. So as long as it's a car, which is automated or manual, whatever it is, you may pretty much master the task of driving. So that's the learning process that we are talking about. Now, let me just point out to you here that when we are talking about learning to learn, this is where we are saying that this is the process that we need to master. Rather than mastering a task, you are mastering the process that is involved in learning that task. That is the crux of the matter for learning to learn. Let's move on to now the concept of learning to learn. Now, learning to learn is a concept that has been in use for a long time in the field of cognitive psychology, but it was not really popularized. It was popularized by the field of artificial intelligence. They have a subject called machine learning, and meta learning, or the concept of learning to learn, is basically a subset in machine learning. So it has become a very, very popular concept of, we can do it. We are human beings. We don't need to learn each and every specific task. We can learn the process and utilize that generalized skill to master another task and spend less time and become more proficient at performing that task. So learning to learn, or meta learning, is the science of systematically observing how different machine learning approaches perform on a wide range of learning tasks, and then learning from this experience or metadata to learn new tasks much faster than otherwise possible. Now, this is a very technical, obviously very technical and very AI contextualized definition that I have given you. Now, when you talk about it being contextualized to education or contextualized to our field, not technical field, we basically say learning to learn, or meta learning, is the repeated practice with one kind of task, but learning different material each time, which facilitates the ability to learn new material. Let me take a bit of time and take you to cognitive psychology. Every time that we encounter a stimulus and we respond, there is a neural connection that is made in our brain. Now, the more we make that connection, the more deeper, the more profound that connection becomes. Like, for example, I'll give you, I'm an Indian. And when I need to greet somebody, I basically join my hands and bow my head and say namaste. That's it. But how did I learn that? Obviously, I was taught from my childhood and things like that. So anybody who stands before me and does this automatic response, I don't even need to think, because it has been wired and rewired so many times. I don't even need to think. I automatically join my hands and bow my head in response. However, if you do this to a non-Indian who is not familiar with the way we greet in India, then it'll be difficult for him to respond. Like in the Western culture, they shake hands. So immediately they see somebody and they want to greet you, they immediately extend their hand. So that's the wiring you're talking about. So when you talk about doing a task, there's a literal neural connection that is made in our brain. And when we do that thing over and over again, then we are talking about making that neural connection stronger, and the learning sticks with us. Now, in terms of a definition of meta learning, I have basically provided a few. Donald basically says meta learning is the process by which learners become aware and in control of the ways of perception, inquiry, learning, and growth that they have internalized. This is the process I'm talking about, internalization. It has become a part of you. You don't need to look up for solution. No matter how many ways this problem is presented to you, you know how to tackle it, because you have actually reached that same destination or that same result of the learning task through different modes. That's what internalization is. So meta learning is the state of being aware and of taking control of one's own learning. So I hope we understand what we are talking about. Meta learning is a concept that is basically making us a self-sufficient learner. We become more aware of our cognition. We become more aware of our challenges, and we voluntarily make changes in our learning environment or in our learning experience, so that we take control of the learning experience. Now, basically, meta learning is the process of learning how to learn. There are ways in which this skill of meta learning helps learners achieve different methods for mastering knowledge, skill, and attitude. So you are becoming a more self-sufficient learner. Now, there are two major components of meta learning, one being metacognition and the other being growth mindset. Now, metacognition is a concept where you are, well, the word meta basically means in itself, as meta learning, learning the learning process, So metacognition also basically is the concept where it is you are being asked to think about thinking. It's quite philosophical, I understand, but it is scientifically, and it has been empirically proven and researched upon. So the process of thinking about thinking is what metacognition is, and it is a very, very important and cardinal aspect, a component of meta learning. So it has been shown to enhance learning and transfer across discipline. So if you learn the learning process, it doesn't matter whether you are learning biology, English, literature, Sanskrit, or psychology, mathematics, it doesn't matter. You have mastered the art of learning. So it is transferable from one discipline to the other. It refers to the procedures used to plot, control, and assess one's understanding and performance. It involves critical awareness of one's thinking and learning and one's position as a thinker and a learner. So we are not talking about making our students photocopies of ourselves. We want to inculcate in them the aptitude of becoming a thinker, an individual thinker on their own, substantial enough to put across and articulate their thoughts to the world. And how do we do it? Please propagate on meta learning or metacognitive strategies. Then we talk about the next component, which is the growth mindset. Now, growth mindset is basically the internal belief that skills can be developed through hard work. It is the worst thing in the field of psychology. We say that the worst thing that somebody can do is to believe that he or she cannot achieve it. I will just leave one psychological concept with you, and I hope you ponder upon it and you rediscover yourself through this concept. If you don't love yourself, nobody will love you. So learn to love yourself, learn to appreciate yourself, learn to value yourself, learn to believe that if you put your mind and if you work towards it, you will achieve it. And that's what we're talking about in the concept of a growth mindset. It's a belief of the individual that he or she can develop that particular skill through hard work. I will tell you something. As an individual, on a lighter note, of course, as a person, I cannot sing. Because if I start singing, well, you will have to close your ears, because I have no tune, no rhythm, nothing. Pretty much my friends or my colleagues who know music have actually declared me as a tone deaf person. But sometimes when I teach these concepts and when I research on these concepts, I have asked myself, I said, so what? That means if I put my mind to it and if I say, okay, fine, I'm going to learn to sing, is it possible? Well, the question is, do you have the necessary biological factors that is required to learn to do something? So you cannot just pick up any task and say, okay, fine, I will put my heart and soul to it. I will work day and night and I'm going to master it. Look at your competencies also. Do you have the necessary biological requirements that is required to master that particular task? So that's about it. Let's move on to our next slide, which is, so why are we talking about learning or meta learning or the concept of learning to learn? How is it going to be useful to us? Because we are pretty much, I'm pretty much aware of this thing that I am addressing a crowd or an audience spectrum where the educators of today as well as the educators of tomorrow are present. So I have decided to take it to the classroom setup. Now, in the classroom setup, if you look at it, there are a lot. I mean, classroom setup is probably one of the most profound setting where learning takes place. I know there are learning taking place all over, and we have also understood that it actually takes place through life's experiences. But classroom is where we are made most aware of the concept of learning. So I have decided to take it to the classroom and see how we can utilize the knowledge that we get from metacognition, from cognitive psychology, from neuroscience, from the concept of learning to learn or meta learning, and promote learning in our classroom. Now, I have borrowed these 4 principles put forward by Maya Bialik, and she basically says that there are 4 general aspects of teaching metacognition in our classrooms. The first one being promoting general awareness of the importance of metacognition. Now, as an educator, we need to explicitly talk about meta learning with our students. So since the challenge is to teach students to consciously monitor and regulate their cognition, we were talking about metacognition, they should first consciously think about it and choose to set it as a goal. We can remind the students that learning isn't something that just happens. It doesn't happen the same way for all of us and all the time. We learn differently. We use different faculties to learn. Some are kinesthetic learners, others are auditory learners, others are visual learners. So you have to understand yourself and your experience as a learner. Now, by watching how we learn, making notes of our struggles, strengths, and patterns, we can actually become better learners. If a student fails at a maths problem, for example, it may be valuable to talk about how the thinking process occurred, attitudes behind the learning experience, motivation, and the context may have played in the role in how they chose to perform in that particular or resolve the mathematical problem. Not just correct by math, they're saying, no, this answer is wrong, so this is how you should reach to the correct answer. And that is pretty much what we do as educators. If I ask you a question and you give me a wrong answer, I am attuning your mind to think like me rather than me actually giving you the space to think as an individual and arrive at the same solution, but through using a different pathway. Not mine, but a different pathway, as long as you have arrived to the same solution. So next, we talk about the next point that Bialik basically points out is improving awareness of cognition through modeling. So although metacognition is largely a student-centric practice, teachers play an important role in fostering it by modeling appropriate metacognitive practices explicitly as they teach, so that the students can follow the thought process of an expert and eventually internalize it for themselves. This means saying how you are thinking about your own thinking and reminding the students why that's not important. Are you teaching, most probably, let's say you are teaching grammar, and your point of focus is the correct grammatical syntax or the correct grammatical arrangement in a particular sentence. Now, if the focus of the learning experience is something that you want to, don't only teach what the task is, but tell them what is going on in your mind. What is your metacognitive processes that you are processing, so that they are able to mirror it, and not only mirror it, but become better at it. Okay, so now the third point we talk about is improving regulation and applications of cognition. Now, regulation of and application of cognition is basically not just the aspect of awareness, making them aware of metacognition or the application of it, but you actually provide a better environment, and you actually teach them metacognitive strategies. So you can imagine being aware of where you are procrastinating or you're not studying the most efficient way, and yet not taking action in accordance with your awareness. this step seems like a given, and yet it is not important to highlight it separately, because it is often the biggest roadblock to improvement: procrastination. Mapping out a plan to make improvement based on self-awareness can be a challenging and cognitively demanding undertaking. By carving out classroom time dedicated to develop these skills, we send the message that it's normal for these changes not to happen automatically. Let me put it in simple words. What we are basically saying, or what Balak is basically talking about, is that you make deliberate effort to make your students or make your learners aware of the importance of metacognition. So you actually plan out. I am very cognizant of the fact that we as educators, when we get into a class, we are working within a classroom, within a specified time frame, 50 minutes or 60 minutes or 1.5 hours, whatever it is. And within that time, I have to cover my content. So how is it that I'm going to actually implement a metacognitive strategy or make my students aware of what metacognition is all about? But here is where we need to bring about this change. So we have to take deliberate steps in planning for these activities in our classroom. So let's say we will share a few strategies, and I'll tell you how we intend, or how you can actually utilize these strategies in your classroom. And then, of course, the fourth one being that fostering environments that promote meta learning. We as educators, we need to not only make them aware, but actually create environment that facilitates, that promotes meta learning. And I completely agree with Balak here. Why? Because I have been a learner too. I'm still learning, and I think I will learn all my life. That's what learning is all about. It's a lifelong journey. Now, I'm taking my experience from my university days. I had wonderful professors that my gurus. I owe what I am today to basically my teachers who have taught me throughout my primary education to secondary to my tertiary level education. But in this journey, I have met people who would actually expect you to respond to a particular question that they have put in an exam or in a class exactly the way they have narrated to you. I'm sure all of you are smiling to yourself, because I'm sure you have met one such teacher or an educator in your life who wants you to write the answer exactly the way he has or she has given it to you. So pretty much like almost memorizing and photocopying it in the exam paper. But in the present scenario, when we are talking about actually promoting the concept of learning to learn or meta learning, we have to come out of that mindset. We have to allow, and we have to create an environment where, as educators, we allow our students to think of solutions different than what we have taught them. Maybe they will come up with better or more viable solutions. I don't know how many of you have watched Three Idiots by Amir Khan. If you remember when that particular scene where Amir Khan is sitting in all dazed up and baffled at the engineering professor giving the definition of machine and whatever. So, when he is asked the question to say, okay, define a machine, and he defines it his own way. But then looking at the conventional system of education we follow, and it was so well depicted, he doesn't accept his definition because he wants what is written in the book. So that is what we are talking about. We can no longer move on with that. I mean, the present demands of contemporary life, contemporary education scenario global wide doesn't really call for such a education system or support such an education system. We need to think in a more unconventional way, in a way that we have 10 different solutions to one particular problem. And how can it be done? Through meta learning. Let's move on. Now, I want to share with you a few cognitive strategies that we can actually employ and use ourselves as learners, as well as we can actually teach our learners who we are teaching. So a few metacognitive strategies which basically facilitates the concept of learning to learn. The first one is the concept of massed versus spaced learning session. Now, this is a concept that is borrowed from cognitive psychology. Almost 125 years of research has gone into this particular concept, and over again, it has been proven that spaced learning is more efficient in facilitating a learning of a task than massed learning. Let me bring it down to a much more simpler term. Massed learning is, we all have, as I see this particular composition of this particular group, we have students, we have educators, we have professors. So, we all have sat in classroom setup, and we all have faced exams and things like that. So do you remember or recall those times where before the exam, the whole night you're up, seated, cramming up everything, you're trying to go through this page, go through that book, go through this definition, and you're trying to cram all these learning and everything in one night. So you're trying to learn a large amount of data or a large amount of material in one go, you understand? So either the night before an exam or the day before exam, whatever it is. So what we are trying to talk about mass learning is when we are trying to cram in or learn a large amount of data in short period of time. So that's mass learning. As you can see the picture that I have given you, you are putting on all the material that you have learned throughout the semester or throughout the quarter, and you are trying to get it into your system in one night. That's mass learning. And that's the most, if I'm not wrong, most practiced form of learning that I did it. I wish I knew that there was space learning. I did it in my college and my university days. But now that I know of these facts and these findings or research findings, I encourage my students, and I would actually encourage my colleagues here to encourage your students to undertake spaced learning. Now, what is spaced learning? Now, as you can see in the diagram below, spaced learning is more relaxed form of learning. Relaxed form of learning in the sense you have gaps between the initial period where you have encountered the task. You take a bit of gap and then you review it, and then ultimately you have a retention interval, and then you finally are tested for it. So what we are basically talking about, that you give adequate time for the learning experience to get internalized. These few words are basically for my students, friends who are around now listening to me. My advice to you is, even when you're sitting down to study for your exam, try to engage in spaced learning. We all know, and it is an empirical fact, that as human beings, our attention span, an adult, healthy human being's attention span is 20 minutes. So if I engage with you in anything that takes me beyond 20 minutes, I have to break the monotony. So you may ask, so how are you doing it, Doc? I am doing it by moving you from one slide to the other. If I am not keeping you in one slide for 20 minutes, or we are not talking about the same thing for 20 minutes, So when you talk about spaced learning, you are learning chunks of information, giving a bit of gap, and then getting into another chunk. So you are not sitting down and learning all the 10 topics in a night, but you undertake this learning and let's say learn one topic, give a day's gap, learn the second topic, give a day's gap, move on to the third, and then ultimately when you're getting towards the exam, you move on with summarization. Obviously, you have actually summarized the notes. You're not going to go through the entire topic. So you are doing this learning, or you're undertaking the learning in small sessions. And the gaps that you are giving, basically you are allowing your brain to assimilate what you have put in. It's just that I don't have a lot of time. Otherwise, I would have actually told you about the works of Barbara Oakley. In your own time, please go ahead and research about Barbara Oakley and her concept of focused and diffused modes of our brain. Our brain basically works in these two modes of functioning. There is focused modes of functioning, and then there is diffused mode of functioning. Diffused mode of functioning is where we are more relaxed, where we are not completely engrossed in what we are doing. And in those gaps, our brain basically tries to add more meaning to it, work on what you have just put in, so that it becomes more permanent. So that's about masked and spaced learning. I hope I have conveyed to you the concept clearly. And then the second metacognitive strategy that I want to share with you is the concept of chunking. Again, it's a concept borrowed from cognitive psychology. Chunking is a process by which we try to fool our short-term memory in accommodating larger pieces of information than its capacity is. Now, let me give you a little bit of background. Human memory is basically divided into 3 compartments. I will use the analogy of a train. We are Indians, we travel in trains a lot. So I'm going to utilize the analogy of a train. Now, human memory system is basically divided into 3 compartments. The first compartment is called sensory memory. The second compartment is called short-term memory. The last compartment is called long-term memory. Now, sensory memory does not really have the capacity to hold information. So information comes and it moves out, comes and it moves out. The moment you decide to pay attention to any of these memories that are passing through the sensory memory compartment, you transfer it to short-term memory. So the moment you decide to pay attention to a particular stimulus or a particular information that is passing through the sensory memory, it has moved to the short-term memory. Now, in short-term memory, you store information for a certain period of time. It has time limitation. So you hold information there. I'm sorry. You hold information there for a particular period of time, and it cannot hold a lot of information. Actually, according to a renowned psychologist and a researcher, George Miller, he basically puts the number 7. So he says the capacity of short-term memory is plus or minus 2, which is 5 to 9. If you mathematically calculate it, it's about 5 to 9 bits of information. So if you're talking about numbers, at any given point of time, our memory can only, or short-term memory can only accommodate these 5 to like minimum, right? The lower minimum, you can even, the lower the numbers, the easier it is for you to remember. But the higher continuum, that's what I'm concerned about. So you cannot, the capacity is 9 maximum, plus or minus 7. 7 plus or minus 2. Actually, he calls 7 as magical number 7. So when you talk about this 9, then you may ask me, how is it that we remember larger chunks of information? I was giving you the example of a number, isn't it? So how is it that we remember phone numbers? Phone numbers consist of 10 digits, isn't it? So it is way beyond our capacity to hold in the short-term memory. Now, if you notice, we remember phone numbers in chunks. The first 4 numbers are basically the network provider, whether it's Airtel or whatever it is. It's the network provider, Vodafone or Reliance or whatever it is. So it's a very specific, unique number which is tied down to a network provider. But then the next 6 digits, we either chunk it or put it together in 2s or 3s. So if you look at the way we store phone numbers, it's like 0974, okay, 22, 32, 69. So you see, instead of allocating 2 spaces in my memory for 2, I have put it as 1. I have only given it as 1 space, as 22. Rather than saying 66, I have put it as 66. So I am basically trying to fool my short-term memory in order to accommodate, tricking my short-term memory to accommodate more information than its capacity is. And how do we do it? We do it through the process of, or the concept of, chunking. Okay. To illustrate this, I have basically included a slide that you may find interesting. The next slide. Let's look at this number. I mean, these alphabets. There are 18 letters here that I have put across to you. Now, if I ask you to remember these letters, I give you a certain period of time and I tell you, okay, fine, like obviously not a whole day or an hour, but I give these numbers to you and I say, okay, fine, you have 10 minutes. Memorize it and recall it, you know. How many of you think you will be able to recall it? A very few of us. But then, if you are a person who plays Scrabble or crosswords, then you would be able to do this or employ metacognitive strategies to utilize chunking and remember it. So if you look at it, first of all, what do? We chunk it in letters. We put these letters together and see if it makes a word that I am familiar with. When I put these letters together and I say, okay, fine, I can see cat there, I can see ABC there, I can see ABM there, I can see XYZ there, I can see HEN there, I can see KFC there. We can further categorize and utilize metacognitive strategies to make our memory much more stronger, not just remembering it as 6 categories of cat, ABC, IBM, but actually combine it and see, are there any similarities between the words that I have formed out of the letters that were given to me? So when I look at it and I say, okay, fine, cat and hen, they are living things. So I put cat and hen together. So I put them, I'm reducing my category. So I have less to remember. I am trying to do chunking, okay? Then we talk about IBM and KFC. IBM and KFC are companies. So I put them again in another chunk, okay? And when we talk about XYZ and ABC, they are alphabets. The first 3 letters and the last 3 letters of alphabet. So I chunk them together again. So you see, from 18 letters, if I was to input this entire 18 letters, it is impossible for me because my short-term memory's capacity is not so. Okay, so I go further and I actually chunk it into smaller bits of information, larger bits of information, which is I create them into categories, which is I have created 6 groups. Then when I look at this group, I see, okay, fine, I can further reduce the categories and I say, okay, fine. Then ultimately I have reduced it to 3 categories, well within the capacity of my short-term memory. So even if you ask me after 3 days, I will be able to tell you all the words. So that's metacognitive strategies. Let's move on. The other metacognitive strategy is the aspect of, or the importance, I would say, of polyphasic sleep. What we need to understand is sleep is very important. Sleep is very, very, not only just for our physiological existence or our physiological health, but in terms of memory formation, in terms of consolidation of information, sleep is very, very important. Now, in that being said and that being accepted, it's not just the sleep that we all undertake of, like, in a night sleep. Mostly when we talk about sleep, we are talking about, okay, you sleep at you sleep in the during the night, you sleep 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, depending on whatever your body's need is. Okay, so what we are trying to or what cognitive research findings have proposed is that rather than this one solid a phase of sleep of 7 or 8 hours that we are most used to, polyphasic sleep is actually very actually facilitates meta learning, or facilitates learning, consolidation of learning. And what is polyphasic sleep? Rather than sleeping at one stretch for 7 hours, you actually sleep in spurts, in short phases. Okay, so you sleep like the polyphasic sleeper can rest 4 to 6 times a day during a day. So I'm a Bengali. I'm a Bengali, and if you are any familiar with Bengali culture, we have the concept of what is known as bhat ghum. Bhat ghum is a cultural concept that we have where we need to sleep after our lunch. So the siesta kind of thing, we need to have this sleep, and it's very, very dear to us as Bengalis that we, you have had your lunch and you have had your rice and fish and everything, and then you need this nap, not sleep exactly, but a nap. 20 minutes, it's enough, but it actually helps you and re-energizes your brain wirings, re-energizes your synaptic connections, your neural connections, and basically facilitates your learning. Okay, so no one person's sleep requirement are exactly the same. Like I told you, it's your body's requirement, so you cannot put the general consensus is, okay, fine, yes, 7 to 8 or 7 to 8 hours of sleep. But then what we need to keep in mind, if you do not sleep 7 to 8 hours, is something wrong with you? Are you showing sleep anomalies? Not really. The whole purpose of sleep is for you to feel energized and for you to feel rejuvenated, for you to feel adequately equipped to face the day. So if you are a person who sleeps 4 hours a night and catches a nap here and there, that's what polyphasic sleep is. Okay, so some require 8 solid hours of sleep for optimal functioning. Some else, other people actually may require 5 hours, but then they take short naps here and there, afternoon, evening, or whatever it is, after reading morning paper, after the evening tea, whatever. So polyphasic sleep has been seen to facilitate the consolidation of learning experiences. And then we move on to our next slide, which is use of mnemonic skills. Mnemonics we all use. I'm sure we all use. You remember the way we used to remember the 9 planets that we were taught? Now I know there are 8 planets, but the 9 planets that we were taught. My very by my very earnest mother, blah blah, and all the stuff. Or the way we remembered the colors in a rainbow, we used mnemonics. Those are mnemonic skills. So mnemonic skills are very useful. We can use mnemonic skills to remember large amount of data, very unfamiliar amount of data. So utilize mnemonic skills to teach mnemonic skills to your students so that they are able to use it in their learning experiences, okay? Rather than giving them the whole process of whatever you're teaching or the enumerating the entire steps, you give them, create a mnemonic for them so that it becomes easier for them to remember when you want them to recall. Now, it's important. Why? Because it actually undertakes or facilitates what is known as elaborative rehearsal. Elaborative rehearsal, remember we talked about the information. When we pay attention to information, it moves from sensory memory to short-term memory. Now, from short-term memory to long-term memory, information can only move if we use elaborative rehearsal. Now, in short, what is elaborative rehearsal? It is adding meaning to your experience. Meaning in the sense like it is, you are basically trying to find resemblance between the new set of data that you're trying to put into your long-term memory with something that is already stored. I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm trying to learn the language, the Tamil language. And one of the word is nalle, good, nalle. Okay. So for me, when I first encounter this word, it's very difficult for me because it's new. So now, if I deliberately utilize elaborative rehearsal and I somehow find a similar word which is already stored in my memory system, and I say, okay, fine, it is this. I'll give you an example. I know how to speak in Hindi. So let's say nala. You know nala, stream, nala. So I said, okay, in Hindi, nala, and in Tamil, nalle. Immediately, it has stuck. Why? Because I have used elaborative rehearsal and it has gone into my long-term memory. And long-term memory's capacity is unlimited. There is nothing that can actually, it is, you can store, you can't even put a capacity actually. You can, it's unlimited, it's for, there is no time, there is no expiry date to long-term memories. That is why you remember experiences that you have had as a child up to this date. You remember it. Why? Because it's stored in the long-term memory. So what's the take-home message? The take-home message, my dear friends, is this. It turns out that all this while we have been emphasizing as educators and as learners on skill, knowledge, attitude. But it's important, it's high time that we need to pay attention to the concept of meta-learning and how important it is to the experience of learning. It's no longer adequate enough for us to just learn, but we have to learn the process of learning. Meta-learning helps within subjects, and it helps to reach outside of them. It makes us more likely to transfer what we know from one sphere of life to another, to figure out a more optimal way of achieving our goals, and to live according to our principle. And it also achievable in classroom setup, as I have mentioned to you, or I have shown it to you. And it can enhance learning at every stage. Thus, to conclude, I see Dr. Anita coming up on the screen, so I know my time is up. So to conclude, I would like to leave with you a very famous quote by Emerson, where he says, "Life is a journey, not a destination." Equally, learning is a journey too. It's not a destination, and our learning never ends, as I have mentioned to you earlier. So enjoy this journey. I hope what I have shared with you today makes this journey more enjoyable to you. Otherwise, thank you very much once again for all your attention, and I will be available for your questions and comments. And thank you once again for this opportunity, dear organizers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation, I should say, during this post-lunch. It was quite interesting, useful, informative, and we didn't want to have a nap, I should say. Okay. Would you like to take some questions from the audience, Professor?
Yes, please.
Yeah. First question would be, in the Indian context, is learning a language similar to learning any other subject? He's asking about oral societies too. Can I repeat?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, please.
Is learning a language similar to learning any other subject? This question is from Ravi Bhushan. He wants you to connect with the oral societies in India.
Did I get it correctly? The oral
societies.
Oral societies in India.
Yes.
Okay. Learning pretty much, whether you're talking about learning a language or you're talking about learning physics or you're talking about learning mathematics, whatever it is, as long as you're talking about learning, the phenomena of learning, the behavior of learning, Ravi Bhushan. First of all, thank you very much for your question, Ravi Bhushan. And this is my answer. It has its own pattern. So whether you're going to utilize that process that I was talking about in the concept of learning a language or any other form or material, it pretty much remains the same. Of course, it also depends on a lot of other factors that I've shown you, the other factors being gender, age, and all those concepts. But learning pretty much is, it is seen as a behavior in itself, irrespective of the content that you're trying to master. Thank you very much, ma'am.
The second question again, human memory. Since human memory has been externalized long since, has technology made us better learners?
Okay. Well, I would say it's a personal perception. There are some who feel that technology has actually made us better learners. Others feel that no, it has actually dulled our natural intellectual capacity. The reason I'm saying this is because I'll give you an example. You're talking about memory. Remember those days when we did not have a cell phone? And we did not have these apps of trying to remember our mother's birthday, father's birthday, sister's birthday, cousin's birthday. We remembered it, you understand? And I think we were mathematically more proficient because we remembered phone numbers. We remembered birthdays, we remember things. But now with a phone, all I need to do is a press of a button and I have everything. And I think it has made us a little lazy. But look at it on the other hand, it has definitely increased different facets of development. So it's really how you want to take it. It has both its pros and cons, let me put it that way. Thank you.
Would you take another question, please?
Please, yes, please.
It's from Professor C. Dharm Devi. What strategies would you suggest for the so-called slow learners?
Very, very good question. Very good question, Dr. Menon. Of course, the slow learners will have to have very contextualized metacognitive strategies, because obviously the cognitive strategies that I have shared with you obviously is used for the people who fall under the continuum of average learners, where you're talking about their IQ falling between 70 to 130 and those. But when you talk about slow learners, because of their naturally lower capacity of cognition, you have to utilize more unique and contextualized strategies. Because this question is coming from Dr. Menon, you can actually write me a mail, Doc, and I will share with you the specified, uniquely contextualized strategies that we can actually use for slow learners. But they are there, sure, they are there.
Thank you, Professor. There's actually, in fact, there's a overflooding appreciation, note of appreciation for you in the chat box, I should say. Thank you,
I am humbled. Thank you so much. I am humbled.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So
May I request all the participants to log into their respective chat rooms, please?
Please hands போட்டிருக்கீங்களா?
The paper presenters, Dr. Anita. Please ask
Sorry,
the paper presenters.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
The paper presenters are asked to log into their respective chat rooms.
If there aren't any questions, we can thank the resource person and we can
Yeah.
close it.
I thank
Thank
for
you,
enough.
thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, if that is going to be the third session, we are going to start now the paper presentation parallel sessions. The people have already gathered in their virtual classrooms. And now for the day 3 tomorrow, we are going to have again 3 input sessions. And the first session is going to be by Reverend Dr. Francis M. Peter, SJ Professor and ELT expert XLR at Jamshedpur. And he is going to be talking on the Forsnick linguistics for industry. And for the second session tomorrow, female masculinities in English literature by Dr. R.S. Bhaskaran, Professor of English, Omar Al Mukhtar University, Libya. And in the afternoon, we are going to have Kafullah, who is going to speak on cross-cultural influences. Okay, the person is an author, photographer, and an entrepreneur from Zambia. We could now get going to the other sessions. The feedback form has been already shared with you. Please go ahead and fill it. It was a pleasure having all of you. See you again tomorrow.
Thank you, Father. The paper presentation has already started, and in the chat rooms, those people who are presenting papers may join, and other participants can also join any chat room they wish to. The link is available. Please join and encourage the paper presenters by your valuable participation. Thank you, one and all.
கேட்டுட்டு போடுங்க சார். ஆண்டனி சார்லாம் லைன்ல இருக்காரு.